So, hi everyone, my name is Leah and I'm the community manager at Cro AI. And I'm very, very honored to be sitting here next to Dominik because I fell in love with Sulie's pitch deck, which was very visually appealing as soon as they joined Cro AI. And also thank you to Split Tech City for inviting us to the pre-program. I know people say that usually bad moderators let their guests introduce themselves, but I would like to give Dominik the chance to introduce himself the way he wants to. So Dominik, tell us who you are.
Yeah, sure. So thanks a lot for the introduction. So I'm Dominik, the founder of Sulie. So before I founded Sulie, I was working for several years in the gaming industry, so leading business development at Nanobit. I'm an engineer at heart, so finished computer science. And this is also, some sort of a connection to Sulie and the things that we are doing in the startup.
Okay. And now that we mentioned Sulie already multiple times, could you give us a short explanation of what Sulie is and what it does, but in an easy to understand language so that we might meet everyone's expectations?
Yeah, sure. So I'll try to keep it simple. So at Sulie, we're kind of creating Notion for data science. So what this means is that we're trying to ease the path and the mechanics for making predictions about various business outcomes. So you're a business that wants to know things about churn, about retention, about how much someone might actually spend on your product. Typically, you need like an army of PhD scientists or data scientists in order to train such models. Whereas in case of Sulie, we're working on some sort of, let's call it automation, where it's, let's call it a plug-and-play solution. So you have your data, you connect with your data, and you get the predictions that you're actually looking for. So in a nutshell, we're trying to ease the path to predictive modeling and forecasting so that companies can actually focus on making decisions and not actually spending such amounts of resources on actually creating, that is, building those models from scratch.
Okay, and when we talk about the idea and the realization of it in total, how did you come to the idea of Sulie? Like as an answer to which problem or which questions that you noticed in the market that you started developing the idea of Sulie as a solution for that?
Yeah, so the idea was born when I was still working at Nanobit, so officially part of the Stillfront group, which has 23 different studios. And that was like 2 years ago, I believe, when there was a large hype, and it's still going on partially, about generative AI. And generative models in general. And it struck me a bit that, so with all of those new things happening, that people and companies in general are still neglecting and ignoring some of the basics, some of the types of models, machine learning models, that have been present for more than 20 years. And that they are still struggling to develop solutions. They're still struggling to predict how much how much money are they going to make from a marketing campaign or a particular customer or whatever. And with all of those advancements, things were going nowhere. It was some sort of a status quo. And this is where I decided to work on the business and actually approach some of the early customers, that is adopters of Sulie, with the solution that we are building.
Okay, and I know it's still early, but how is for now the response of the market to Sulie, to the solution that you're offering?
So the response was, I would say twofold, in the sense that we made mistakes for early stage. So I believe every startup does that. And generally the response was negative in a regard that you do have still quite a large, I would say, amount of skepticism towards using generative models for things like data science and analytics in general, because things want to have outcomes that are deterministic and base their decisions on deterministic stuff instead of hallucinations. So that's the first thing. But on the other hand, we are getting a really positive feedback in the sense that we are really making those businesses' lives easier by saving them time, money, and resources on actually getting to the predictions or forecasts that they are looking for.
Okay. And since we named this talk the AI Founders Solo Odyssey, I would like to know, was the idea behind Sulie always a solo founder idea? Or was it the result of some agreements not going well, or were you confident that you wanted to do this as a solo founder?
I knew that I wanted to start my own startup like ever since from a few years ago. But honestly, I never thought about whether I want to do it solo or with someone else. So it came kind of naturally in the sense that I'm an engineer at heart, so I finished computer science. I was working in machine learning for more than 7 years on all sorts of problems, so to say. In the past 4 years, I was working in business development. So it came naturally from like the aspect that I covered both sides in terms of the business side and the engineering side. So I never had like a need for, I would say, a sparring partner. That's what I initially thought. But after a few months, you like change your mind. You finally realize that it's not only about complementing some specific knowledge, but it's mostly about having someone to actually challenge some of your thoughts, which I believe is the most valuable thing that a co-founder can actually do for you.
Yeah, I was about to ask, was it difficult to be in it alone from the beginning? Like, what would you point out as maybe some of the biggest disadvantages to being alone that maybe now that you have the experience and the knowledge would change in a different opportunity?
Yeah, so I mean, currently we are a team of 4, so things have changed a bit ever since. But in general, you still have a case where, in terms of some of the specifics like business related or distribution related, being a solo founder, you still don't have like a, I would say, a sparring partner at the same level with the same type of knowledge that you actually need for making some productive discussions about whether this is about ICPs or this is about distribution or anything else. So I mean, we have tried to, so we have covered that part as well in a sense that ever since a few weeks ago, we have agreed to have an external advisor, which also happens to be one of the managing directors of Techstars, which is one of the leading global accelerators right next to Y Combinator. So that eases things in a sense that we do have a sparring partner now, which puts a lot of criticism and which challenges quite a lot of things.
And back on the table, we discussed some difficulties that you've kind of like encountered as a startup in the beginning, especially related to VC fundings. So if you could elaborate on that a bit, like what was your experience with that part of the business?
Yeah, so the experience of that part of the business is that, I mean, we thought about like VC funding right from the start, and we knew that for at least like a first period, we want to be bootstrapped due to like several reasons, not to go into too much details. But nevertheless, like from a VC perspective, it certainly makes things more difficult because obviously you cannot distribute the risk the same level as you can when you have a team or when you have a team of two or more members. So, I mean, from that perspective, yes, it's certainly much more difficult to get VC funding while being a solo founder without like any traction. So that most likely won't happen. But in case you do have traction, in case you get to your first results, you hit like, I don't know, 10K MRR or some of the other stuff, then of course, I mean, that changes perspective as well.
And in terms of starting something in Croatia, what would you say are some difficulties that you maybe encountered there, apart from the bureaucracy, which I'm sure was also a part of the confusion?
I mean, luckily that wasn't actually that troubling. I would say that was the least troubling part. So I literally opened the company like online throughout like 2 hours, I think so. So
this has to be a headline in the newspapers.
Yes,
positive
probably.
talk about our bureaucracy.
Probably yes, but but yeah, nevertheless, I mean, apart from that, I mean, I would say that things have been developing really in a good direction over the past 5 years. I wouldn't say that all of those things, all of the headlines that everyone read about, like, I don't know, the Nanobit acquisition, the Photomet acquisition, and all of those things happening. I mean, this is not something that was developing for the past 5 years. It was developing for the past 15 or 20 years. But in general, in terms of like the general startup landscape, I think that things are definitely improving. Funding is far more accessible than it used to be. And I mean, let's face it, it's a global market, so you can connect with anyone you'd like. And I personally, I didn't see like any disadvantages on that part, in that regard. I would rather say that it's more about like some micro communities, which are still a bit lacking. There are a few organizations which are obviously working on that, including Cro AI, which has not been sponsored. And that, I mean, obviously helps a lot when it comes to like knowledge spreading or finding team members or anything else. But in general, I would say that the landscape is certainly much better than it was.
And the last part of the answer actually brings me to the second question, which to not keep it this negative in terms of what was difficult or stuff. What are some things that you would say you're thankful for in those situations you were a solo founder? Like something that when you're looking back, you can tap yourself on the shoulder and be like, it's good that I was by myself in these situations.
I mean, I would say that the biggest advantage was having like laser sharp focus, because initially a lot of startups try to act to be actual startups and not actually build their products. That's something that we were doing for like roughly 2 weeks as well. But luckily we learned the mistake very, very quickly. But nevertheless, I would say that the razor-sharp focus is definitely the biggest advantage in the sense that you can really focus on building the product, you can really focus on acquisition, on anything that you actually must do at that given point in time. Of course, there is still the disadvantage of that, and that's a day has only 24 hours, you're alone. So that obviously is not easy because you have to deal with things like content marketing, distribution, business strategy, product development, just to name a few. But yeah, in general, I would say that's certainly the biggest advantage.
I think speaking from my side and probably also someone from the audience, I think there's like a big congratulation that we have to give you for doing something by yourself, because I'm pretty sure that a lot of us here are sitting on an idea that we're just too scared or not sure if we want to jump in it by ourselves. So now if you would like look back at the young self that started something as a solo founder, or if we turn it over to someone in the audience that is thinking about starting something, what is some advice that you would give out in that context?
Some of the most important advice would be, I would say, focus on your ICP and focus on distribution. Of course, you need to have like laser sharp focus on building the product, because that's obviously what will get you revenue, what will get you your sellings up. But nevertheless, having the right ICP and actually validating those hypotheses, that's the most important part, I would say, of like starting a startup. We failed at that in a sense that we didn't do that like right from the start. So that led to some invalid hypothesis. But nevertheless, we didn't lose too much time on it. So that's also a good thing. But nevertheless, yeah, I would certainly say, so focus on the ICP, focus on the distribution, and try not to like build a space rocket from the scratch, but instead of focus on like some micro stuff. So something that has impact but can be really nicely isolated and built and iterated upon very quickly.
Okay. And when we talked about the market's reaction to Sulie and some of the results that you had, you've mentioned some of the things and mistakes you were making. How did you realize what those mistakes were, apart from maybe someone on the market pointing it out? Like, were there some internal procedures, and how did you turn them over into kind of like upgrading the current system?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the advantages of Sulie, of the product that we are building, is that we are trying to bring forecasting, predictive modeling, so advanced machine learning to non-technical teams. So teams like marketing, product, and various others. So without actually relying on data analysts or data scientists. And that all sounds great. And initially we thought about actually like approaching those teams, the teams that are going to be using the product, which was a valid hypothesis back then. But of course, we didn't know back then that they are not the advocates of such tools within the company, but instead of, we have to go another way around, and that's through data scientists or data analysts, because they are the decision makers about actually enforcing that, is embracing that kind of products internally. So that's, I would say, the first lesson that we learned, in a sense that we didn't do like that much research on that part. We were trying to move quickly on iterating with the product and actually doing some outreach. But yeah, luckily we got to this conclusion fairly quickly.
And in terms of, now that you mentioned marketing teams and kind of like that Sulie is mostly targeted in their direction, so it's to non-technical teams, do you think that in this phase of kind of like the AI trend or buzzword situation I would be, do you think that teams like that are ready to embrace kind of tools like Sulie, or are they still kind of in the phase where they're sticking to Chat GPT and relying on the results that they are getting from them in terms of helping them speed up their processes?
Depends on the application. Like, if in case you're talking about like marketing stuff, like creating that is scratching creatives for your ads,
Okay.
that's obviously a good use case where different models, like different diffusion models, can actually help you a lot with some really, really good results even nowadays. When it comes to some things like forecasting, like making decisions by using ChatGPT or some similar, let's call it language models for like analyzing data, I would say that there is still a great deal of mistrust because people just simply lack what I initially thought. This certain like determinism, in a sense that in some cases the model might fail, meaning that you get the wrong data from an analysis and you make decisions based on invalid data, which obviously can cost the business in some cases really a lot. So I would say that in general, things are definitely moving in that direction, but I would say that there is still a large level of skepticism and that the technology still needs to, that is the models itself, still need to develop far more strongly on the side of preventing hallucinations, just as one thing.
Okay. And in terms of AI still currently being kind of, let's say, a wave that everyone wants to ride, and the market kind of like being overflown with a lot of new startups and companies emerging every day, what would you say is some kind of like good point or advice how to stand out in a market like that currently? Maybe from the perspective of a solo founder, but maybe also just in a perspective of Sulie as a company.
I would say that, I mean, the best way would be to focus something that you personally or someone who you actually might know, that you work on a product that you personally experienced. That's the best learning that you can get. In terms of like standing yourself out, I wouldn't say that for being successful, you need to build like the next Chat GPT. You can definitely build something that has a much smaller footprint, that is far less sophisticated, but which perhaps solves like a very tiny specific problem upon which people are spending like hours on weekly, but it could be automated. That's just like in high level one example. So I wouldn't say that it takes like too much brains to actually do something like that. It more actually takes courage and persistence. Because I mean, it's not only a lonely journey, it's a journey where you get a lot of no's. And by not being persistent, by not just simply pushing things forward and learning upon those things, obviously you're not going to get a long way through.
Okay. And in terms of finding team members, let's now, I think the only way we can discuss it is on the Croatian market. How was your experience with that, with finding people that you can trust, that you can bring your vision of it forward and them joining you in it?
Generally, the market has been, I mean, really good for the past, I would say, 10 years, especially in regard to machine learning. I remember when we were still working on some computer vision problems, like almost even 10 years ago. So that was back at the Štiria Media Group in Zagreb. And back then, things were different in the sense that not a lot of teams, not a lot of individuals were actually focused on the machine learning, computer vision, and various other problems. But obviously that changed not only from like a perspective where things where people actually engaged by themselves in learning those concepts and the technology itself, but rather I would also say that like from an educational, that is governmental point of view, things have also changed because it's also, I mean, being an essential part of studies nowadays.
And what would you say, what role do communities like, for example, Cro AI or also Split Tech City and in, let's say, communities like that play in early startups helping to kind of like emerge in the market?
I would say that, I mean, the first obvious benefit is that you do get some sort of promotion, which I believe everyone is seeking for. But the most important part, I would say, is actually bringing people together on topics your business cares about. Like in case of Cro AI, obviously that creates specific connections. So we are a company focused on machine learning and various other sophisticated use cases. With that, you have a network that we can take advantage of, not in the nasty way, but in the way that we can actually share some knowledge, which is, I believe, the most important aspect. So there are really a lot of advantages, and of course, I mean, also the great initiatives like the meetups that you organize, and I mean, generally the conferences like this one is split.
Not sponsored at all.
Not sponsored, yes.
I know that this is now the sign for the questions, but I would like to steal just 1 minute from it and to ask you, what can we expect from Sulie in the future? Like, what are some of your plans?
Yeah, so the plans is to make the product, I mean, not only better, but much smarter than it is nowadays. We still are early stage. We are still working on some really challenging stuff from like a tech perspective. I mean, in general, we are trying to, I would say, take over a very specific niche, a very specific segment, and position ourselves within that. So that's the focus on the non-technical people, and in the future on not only predictive analytics, but also prescriptive, where it actually gives you specific recommendations about the actions that you should take, like increase your budgets, as an example. So that's the direction that we are heading to, but obviously it will take time to build all those things.
Yeah. Okay. I've gotten the, let's say, sense that this audience is rather a shy one in regards of questions, but if there maybe is someone that would like to ask Dominik a question, now would be the time. They prefer doing it one-on-one with you later, with a drink. I think we can then wrap it up. Dominik, thank you so much for sharing these lovely seats with me today, and thank you to everyone for listening. I would like to invite you all to keep up with Sulie, to follow them, to follow their journey and see all the amazing things coming there from their way, which I'm sure that there will be plenty of, and to also follow Cro AI, because we have a lot of events coming in this part of the year and all over Croatia. So maybe we get to hang out sometimes again very soon, I hope. So yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leah and Dominik. A round of applause, please.